The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall, frosted windows of the Nashville Criminal and Family Court building, casting long shadows across the marble floors. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day, a day typically associated with love and celebration, yet here in the halls of justice, it felt like the joke nature could play. The corridors echoed with the footsteps of lawyers in expensive suits, social workers carrying thick files, and families whose lives hung in the balance of judicial decisions. Among them walked Harrison, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hand gripping the small fingers of her granddaughter, Emma. Emma was 3 years old, almost 4, with golden curls that fell softly around her cherubic face. She wore a pale pink dress that her grandmother had carefully selected, hoping the cheerful color might help her granddaughter face what was coming. But Emma's eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a child who had seen too much conflict, experienced too much loss, and witnessed too much adult dysfunction. Her gaze was distant, her expression blank, as though she existed in a world parallel to everyone around her. She clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit to her chest, a toy that had been her constant companion for the past 6 weeks, ever since her world had fallen apart. Felt the familiar knot tighten in her chest as they approached the courtroom doors. She had raised 3 children of her own, and she thought she understood the complexities of family dynamics. But nothing had prepared her for watching her granddaughter become collateral damage in a bitter custody war between parents who had once promised to love each other forever. The irony wasn't lost on her. Emma's mother and father claimed to be fighting for Emma's best interests. Yet their actions spoke a different language entirely. The custody battle had begun 8 weeks earlier when Sarah Harrison filed for divorce from James Harrison, claiming irreconcilable differences. What started as a seemingly amicable separation had quickly descended into chaos. James accused Sarah of infidelity and emotional abuse. Sarah countered with claims of financial mismanagement and neglect. Then came the fight over Emma. Both parents wanted full custody. Both parents wanted to punish the other. And both parents seemed to have forgotten that Emma, sweet, innocent 3-year-old Emma, was watching everything unfold, absorbing the anger, the accusations, the pain. The worst part from perspective was that Emma had simply stopped talking, not because she couldn't speak. She had been a chatterbox just months ago, the kind of child who asked endless questions and sang songs at the top of her lungs. Emma had stopped talking because she had learned that words were weapons. She had watched her parents hurl words like daggers at each other. She had heard her mother cry at night. She had seen her father's face turn red with rage. And in her 3-year-old wisdom, Emma had decided that silence was safer than sound. Pushed open the heavy wooden doors to the courtroom and her breath caught. The room was packed. Lawyers occupied the front rows, their leather briefcases positioned strategically on the tables. Family court mediators conferred quietly in corners. Social workers sat with their documentation, ready to present their reports. Even a few journalists had managed to secure seats in the back, not because this was a high-profile case, but because custody battles always attracted attention, that morbid curiosity about other people's tragedies. Found her designated seat in the back row and carefully positioned Emma beside her, making sure the child could see everything, but also had her grandmother's arm to lean against if needed. Emma didn't resist. She simply sat, her small frame perfectly still, her rabbit clutched tightly against her chest, had tried everything to reach her granddaughter over the past weeks. She had offered ice cream, promised trips to the park, attempted to engage her in stories and songs. Nothing worked. Emma would accept these offerings with a nod or a small smile, but she remained locked inside herself, unreachable. His heart broke a little bit more each day. The courtroom itself was intimidating, all dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and an overwhelming sense of authority and judgment. The judge's bench loomed at the front, empty now, but soon to be occupied by Judge, a woman renowned for her fairness but also for her no-nonsense approach to family law. Had done her research. Judge had a reputation for seeing through the performance that parents put on and focusing on what was genuinely best for the child. Had dared to hope that perhaps this judge would understand Emma's silence meant something. That perhaps this judge would recognize that what Emma needed wasn't two fighting parents, but two parents who remembered how to love. The waiting was excruciating. Watched as James Harrison entered through one door accompanied by his attorney, Richard, an aggressive man known for taking stances in custody battles. James looked exhausted, his usually carefully groomed appearance slightly disheveled. He wore a dark suit trying to project competence and stability but could see the cracks in his facade. His eyes searched the courtroom and landed on Emma. For a moment, something genuine flickered across his face: concern, love, desperation. He mouthed, "Hi, sweetheart," but Emma didn't respond. She didn't even look at him. James's shoulders sagged and he took his seat. Then Sarah entered from the other door, accompanied by her attorney, Tors, a woman known for her compassionate approach to family law. Sarah looked disheveled in a different way, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. Her makeup was carefully applied to hide her exhaustion, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down her belongings. She also looked toward Emma, and tears immediately sprang to her eyes. She made a move to approach her daughter, but her attorney gently held her back. Rules of the courtroom. Everything had to be formal, procedural, separated. Even love had to take a backseat to protocol. Put her arm around Emma and felt the child lean slightly into her. It was the most physical affection Emma had shown anyone in 6 weeks. Whispered softly, "Grandma's right here, sweetheart. We're going to get through this together." Emma didn't respond verbally, but she did shift her rabbit so that it was held between her and her grandmother, a small gesture that perhaps meant she understood. Or perhaps it meant nothing. Couldn't be sure anymore. The court officers moved through the room, checking that everyone was present and accounted for. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge entered, her robes rustling with authority, and took her seat at the bench. She looked down at the files before her, her expression serious but not unkind. She called the case. The battle was about to begin, but then something unexpected happened. Before the judge could even begin her opening remarks, one of the court officers entered with an announcement. The Courthouse Support Animal Program had scheduled a visit for today. A police dog was in the building, and the judge had approved its presence in the courtroom. The officer asked if there were any objections. His heart quickened. She had signed up for the support animal program 3 weeks ago, desperately hoping that a gentle animal might reach her granddaughter where words could not. But she hadn't known if the timing would work out. She hadn't dared to hope too much. Judge nodded her approval. "Let's proceed," she said. "Bring in the dog." And with those words, everything was about to change. The courtroom fell into an anticipatory silence as everyone waited for the support animal to arrive. Felt Emma shift slightly beside her, though the child's expression remained unchanged. The stuffed rabbit was still clutched firmly against her small chest. Wondered if Emma understood what was about to happen, if some part of her sensed that something different was coming. She squeezed her granddaughter's hand gently, a silent reassurance that whatever came next, she was not alone. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Officer Michael Mitchell walked through, his uniform crisp and his demeanor professional. He was a man in his early 40s, with kind eyes that immediately scanned the room to assess the atmosphere. Behind him, on a leather leash, walked a magnificent German shepherd. The dog was large and clearly well-trained, his movements precise and controlled. His coat was a beautiful blend of black and tan, and his dark eyes were alert, intelligent, and observant. This was Duke, the Nashville Police Department's certified courthouse support animal, and he had been specially trained to provide comfort and emotional stability to traumatized individuals during legal proceedings. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as Officer Mitchell guided Duke slowly down the center aisle of the courtroom. The dog's paws clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound that seemed to amplify in the quiet space. Judge watched with interest from the bench, clearly approving of the animal's calm demeanor and professional bearing. The lawyers on both sides straightened in their seats, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. After all, this was a serious legal proceeding, and some questioned whether an animal had any place in such formal surroundings. But's focus was entirely on her granddaughter. She felt Emma's entire body go rigid beside her. It wasn't the rigidity of fear, knew that particular tenseness well from the past weeks. This was different. This was the rigidity of recognition, of a memory suddenly surfacing from somewhere deep within a young mind, barely dared to breathe. Emma's small hand suddenly released the stuffed rabbit slightly, her fingers instead moving to grip sleeve. Her eyes, which had been distant and unfocused for so long, suddenly sharpened and widened with an intensity that seemed almost impossible from such a young child. Her entire frame trembled, not with fear but with something far more powerful: emotion, recognition, hope. His heart began to race. She could feel her granddaughter's energy shifting, could sense something awakening within the child after weeks of emotional dormancy. But she didn't dare interrupt or prompt. She simply waited, her arm protectively around Emma's shoulders, giving the child space to feel whatever she was feeling. Officer Mitchell continued walking Duke slowly toward the front of the courtroom, unaware that something significant was happening in the back row. He was following protocol, allowing the dog to move calmly through the space so that everyone could become accustomed to the animal's presence. Judge was speaking to him, asking about Duke's training and background, but barely heard the words. Her entire focus was on Emma. Then it happened. Emma suddenly tugged on sleeve with surprising force, the most physically assertive movement her grandmother had witnessed from her in weeks. Emma's small arm extended, and her tiny finger pointed directly at the German shepherd now passing by their row. And then, in a voice so clear, so confident, so absolutely certain that it seemed to cut through the air like a bell ringing out in a silent church, Emma spoke. "That's Buddy." The two words hung in the courtroom, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had stopped. The impact of those two simple words was seismic. Every head turned. Every eye focused on the small child in the back row whose voice had just shattered weeks of profound silence. The courtroom erupted into gasps, a collective intake of breath from lawyers, social workers, court staff, and journalists alike. Officer Mitchell stopped walking. Duke stopped beside him. Judge leaned forward on the bench, her eyes narrowing with intense interest. James Harrison went pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table in front of him so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face cycled through confusion, shock, and then something that looked like grief mixed with anger. Sarah Harrison let out a small cry and stood up, only to be gently pressed back into her seat by her attorney, who whispered something urgently in her ear. Felt tears spring to her own eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of profound relief and joy. Her granddaughter had spoken. After 6 weeks of silence, after 6 weeks of isolation within her own trauma, Emma had found her voice. And she had used it to speak a name that was clearly deeply significant to her. But the shock wasn't over. Officer Mitchell turned, his face showing confusion. He looked at Judge, then back at Emma, then at the dog. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice careful and measured. "Did the child just say something?" Judge nodded, her expression intense and focused. "Yes, Officer Mitchell, the child said, 'That's Buddy.' Does that name mean anything to you?" Officer Mitchell shook his head slowly. "No, Your Honor, this dog's name is Duke. I've only had him for about 8 months, I'm not sure." But he was interrupted by who had stood up, Emma still held firmly against her side. She raised her hand slightly, asking for permission to speak. Judge gestured for her to come forward. Walked carefully with Emma, the child moving as if in a daze, her eyes never leaving the dog. When they reached closer to the front of the courtroom, whispered to the judge, "Emma had a dog named Buddy. He disappeared about 2 years ago during her parents' separation. She loved that dog more than anything in the world. She's been completely silent since she went into foster care. This is the first time she's spoken since arriving at the courthouse." The courtroom exploded, not in a loud, chaotic way, but in the way that important truths break through established barriers. People began talking urgently. The bailiff called for order. James and Sarah both stood up, their attorneys struggling to control them. The journalists in the back were scribbling frantically in their notebooks. This wasn't just a custody hearing anymore. This was something else entirely. Judge banged her gavel once firmly. "Order, we will have order in this courtroom." She looked at Emma, her expression softening slightly. "Young lady, what is your name?" Emma looked up at the judge, then back at Duke, then back at. Her voice when she spoke again was quieter but still clear. "Emma, that's Buddy." The certainty in her tone was unmistakable. She wasn't confused. She wasn't making a mistake. She knew this dog. She knew him with the kind of intimate familiarity that only came from deep emotional connection and time spent together. Judge's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. She turned to the court clerk. "I want a complete background check on this dog immediately. Where did it come from? How long has it been with the police department? I want answers within the hour." She turned back to Officer Mitchell. "Officer, I'm going to ask you to step outside with the dog for now. Something is very wrong here, and I intend to find out what it is." As Officer Mitchell led Duke toward the side exit, the dog turned his head back toward Emma one last time. And Emma, for the first time since entering the courtroom, smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. A smile that said recognition. A smile that said connection. A smile that said something impossible had just happened. Held her granddaughter close, understanding that those two words, "that's Buddy," had just changed the entire trajectory of this case, and perhaps the entire lives of everyone involved. The courtroom had descended into controlled chaos. Judge had called for a recess, dismissing everyone except for the essential personnel. The journalists were escorted out, their protests falling on deaf ears. The spectators filed out reluctantly, already forming theories and preparing stories in their minds. But remained with Emma, and Officer Mitchell was asked to stay as well, now transformed from a peripheral support figure into a central character in an unfolding mystery. Emma sat quietly in a side room with finally released from the formal courtroom setting. A social worker had brought her coloring books and juice, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for the traumatized child. But Emma wasn't focusing on the coloring books. Instead, she kept asking the same question over and over. "Buddy? Where Buddy?" Heart broke with each repetition. Her granddaughter had finally spoken, had broken through weeks of silence, only to immediately become consumed with concern for the dog she had clearly loved so deeply. Meanwhile, in Judge's chambers, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Officer Mitchell sat across from the judge, her law clerk, and a court investigator named Detective Sarah. Mitchell looked genuinely bewildered, his professional composure slightly shaken by the unexpected revelation. "I don't understand," Mitchell said, shaking his head. "I've only had Duke for 8 months. He came to me from the police department's K-9 training program. Before that, I honestly don't know much about his background. The files said he came from a local animal shelter about 18 months ago. As far as I knew, he was just a well-trained dog who showed aptitude for courthouse support work." Judge leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled thoughtfully beneath her chin. "Officer, I need you to get me those files. Everything. Where the dog came from, how it was obtained, any documentation about its previous ownership or history. Detective will be coordinating with you." Detective, a sharp-eyed woman with years of investigative experience, was already making notes. "What's the dog's current name registered as in the police department system?" she asked. "Duke," Mitchell replied. "Duke is his official police department name." "And before that," pressed. Mitchell spread his hands in frustration. "I don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The shelter records would have what he was called before, if anything. But honestly, dogs get renamed all the time when they're adopted or enter training programs." Judge turned to her law clerk. "I want every piece of documentation about this dog. Shelter records, police department files, veterinary records if they exist, everything. I also want you to pull the original custody filing and any police reports filed by either James or Sarah Harrison regarding a missing dog. This child recognized that animal, and I want to know why." Back in the courtroom waiting area, James and Sarah were kept in separate spaces, as per protocol. James paced like a caged animal, his attorney Richard trying to calm him down. "James, you need to think clearly about this," urged. "Whatever is going on with the dog, it doesn't necessarily change our custody strategy." But James wasn't listening. His mind was spinning. A dog named Buddy, missing 2 years ago. Emma's response had been so certain, so definitive. He had been the one to file the missing dog report. He had filed it the night Sarah disappeared with their daughter during their worst fight, the night everything had fallen apart. In another waiting area, Sarah sat with her attorney Tors, her face ashen. When she heard that James's missing dog report was about to be reviewed, her entire body went rigid. Noticed immediately. "Sarah, what is it?" Tors asked gently. "What do you know about this dog?" Sarah's hands trembled. She opened her mouth several times, clearly struggling to decide what to say. Finally, she whispered, "I took the dog." Tors' eyes widened. "You took James's dog when?" "During our last fight," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. "He was so angry that night. He was raging about everything, about me, about Emma, about his job. I was scared. I was terrified. And I saw him grab the dog by the collar roughly, yanking him around. I thought he was going to hurt Buddy. James would never hurt him intentionally, but in that moment he was so out of control. I was afraid." Tors leaned closer. "What did you do?" "I left with Emma while he was on the phone. I took Buddy with us. I drove around for hours trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go home. I was too scared. So I took Buddy to an animal shelter about 40 miles away the next morning. I made up a story about finding him as a stray. I paid extra money to make sure they wouldn't trace him back to me. I was protecting him. I know James would say I was just being vindictive, but I swear I was trying to protect that dog." Tors nodded slowly, processing this information. "Sarah, I need you to understand the gravity of this. If that dog is indeed Buddy and the judge discovers that you deliberately hid this information, it could seriously damage your custody case. Your credibility will be questioned. Everything you've said will be scrutinized." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But don't you see? If I tell the truth now, Emma might understand why I did what I did. She's been so silent, so sad. Maybe knowing that I was trying to protect Buddy will help her understand that I was trying to protect her too. I was trying to get us both away from an increasingly dangerous situation." Back in Judge's chambers, Detective returned with preliminary information. She entered quickly, a folder in her hands, her expression intense. "Your Honor, we found something," announced. "There is a police report filed by James Harrison approximately 2 years ago, reporting a missing German Shepherd named Buddy. The report states that his ex-partner, Sarah Harrison, took the dog during a separation argument. The report was filed, but no serious investigation was conducted at the time because custody of animals isn't typically a criminal priority in family disputes." Judge nodded, processing this. "And the dog at the shelter?" "A German Shepherd matching Buddy's description was brought to the animal shelter by an anonymous woman about 18 months ago. The woman claimed she found the dog as a stray. The shelter has records showing the dog was healthy, well cared for, and up to date on vaccinations. The shelter kept the dog for about 6 months, and then it was adopted by the police department's K-9 training program when they were looking for dogs with the right temperament for courthouse support work." Judge sat back, the picture becoming clearer. So the timeline aligns. Sarah takes the dog from James. Sarah surrenders the dog to a shelter anonymously. The dog ends up with the police department. Emma sees the dog in the courtroom today and recognizes him. "That's the working theory, Your Honor," confirmed. "I've requested the shelter's veterinary records. If this dog has been or tattooed, we might be able to match it definitively to James Harrison's original paperwork. But based on the timeline, description, and the child's reaction, it seems highly probable that Duke is indeed Buddy. Judge stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Nashville skyline. "This case just became infinitely more complicated," she said quietly. "This isn't just about custody anymore. This is about what really happened during the breakdown of this marriage. This is about a child caught in the middle. This is about whether either parent has been truthful about the circumstances surrounding their separation." She turned back to Detective. "I want you to interview both parents separately. I want to know the complete story of what happened that night 2 years ago. And I want security footage from that animal shelter if it exists. I want to confirm Sarah's story. Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell will bring Duke back to the courtroom this afternoon. I want that child to have another chance to see that dog, and I want to observe her reaction more carefully this time. There's something else going on here, something deeper than a simple custody dispute." Back in the side room, Emma had finally stopped asking about Buddy. Instead, she sat quietly, coloring with intense focus, as if the act of putting crayon to paper was the only thing keeping her grounded. Watched her granddaughter carefully, understanding that Emma had just inadvertently opened a door that no one could close again. The child's 2 words had set an investigation in motion that would uncover truths that both her parents had been hiding. Gently stroked Emma's golden hair and whispered, "You did good, sweetheart. You were very brave today. Buddy is okay. We're going to figure this all out." Emma looked up at her grandmother with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young face. "Buddy?" she asked hopefully. "Yes, baby," confirmed. "Buddy is safe, and maybe, just maybe, we're all going to be okay too." But even as she said the words, knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the interrogation rooms of the Nashville Police Department. Detective Sarah sat across from James Harrison in one room, while in another, her colleague, Detective Williams, sat across from Sarah Harrison. Both interviews were being conducted with their respective attorneys present, as required by law. The atmosphere in both rooms was tense, heavy with the weight of secrets about to be exposed. Detective leaned forward slightly, her notebook open on the table before her. She had conducted hundreds of interviews throughout her career, and she could read the micro-expressions that revealed truth and deception. James Harrison was clearly agitated, his leg bouncing under the table in a rhythmic pattern that suggested barely contained anxiety. "Mr. Harrison," began, her voice calm and professional, "I want to walk through the evening that your dog, Buddy, disappeared. I have your original police report here, filed 2 years ago. You stated that your ex-partner, Sarah, took the dog during an argument. Is that accurate?" James nodded. "Yes, that's what happened. She was vindictive. She wanted to hurt me, and she knew that taking Buddy would do exactly that. That dog was my best friend. He was with me through everything after the divorce started." "Walk me through that night," said, not challenging him yet, simply gathering information. James took a deep breath. "Sarah and I were having another fight. We'd been fighting constantly for weeks. That day, Emma had been upset because Sarah had told her that I was moving away. I wasn't actually moving away. That was a lie Sarah told to manipulate both of us. I was furious when I found out she'd said that to our daughter. We had a terrible argument. Sarah was packing things, threatening to leave with Emma. I was telling her that I would fight for custody, that she wasn't a good mother. It got really ugly." "Did you drink that evening?" asked. James hesitated. "Maybe a beer or 2, I was stressed." "More than 2, pressed gently." James looked away. "Maybe 3 or 4, it was a bad day." "Made a note, continue." "At some point, Buddy came over to me. He was sensing the tension, I think. He pressed against my leg the way he did when he was anxious, and I was so angry that I grabbed his collar and yanked him toward the door. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop and go to his bed, but I was rough about it. I was too rough. I was drunk and angry, and I wasn't thinking clearly." The admission hung in the air. Watched James carefully. This was a crucial moment, a crack in the facade. "Sarah saw that?" asked. "Yes, she saw it. and she screamed at me, said I was a monster, said I was abusing the dog. We were already planning for her to move out. This just accelerated things. She stormed into the bedroom and started packing faster. I went to the kitchen and had another drink. The next thing I knew, Sarah was coming out with Emma and some bags. She said she was taking Emma to her mother's house for the night. I told her I would fight her for custody. She said, "Good luck explaining to a judge why you assault animals." James paused, his jaw clenching. And then she took Buddy. She just clipped his leash to his collar and walked out with both of them, my daughter and my dog. I called out after her, but she didn't turn around. I thought she'd bring him back the next day. I thought she was just using him as leverage. "But she didn't bring him back," said. "No, she didn't. I filed the police report the next morning. I've been looking for him ever since. I even hired a private investigator for a while, but there was no trace. It was like he just vanished." Leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be frank with you. We believe we've located your dog. He's been with the Nashville Police Department for the past 18 months as a courthouse support animal. His current name is Duke." James's face went white. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "He's alive. He's okay. He appears to be in good health and excellent condition," confirmed. "Now, I need you to understand the implications of what I'm about to tell you. Your ex-partner did not steal the dog out of spite alone. Your daughter recognized this dog in the courtroom today and spoke his name for the first time in 6 weeks. That child has been traumatized. She watched her parents' relationship deteriorate. She lost her home, her stability, and her dog, all at the same time." In the other interrogation room, Detective Williams was taking a very different approach with Sarah. He had read her statement to her attorney, and now he was asking the difficult follow-up questions. "Ms. Harrison, you took the dog to protect him from your ex-husband's potential abuse. Is that correct?" Williams asked. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "James was drinking heavily. He was unstable. I saw him grab Buddy roughly that night. I truly believed the dog was at risk." "But you didn't leave the dog with a family member or a friend," Williams noted. "You took him to an animal shelter 40 miles away and gave a false story about finding him as a stray. Why?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because I was scared. I was scared of James. I was scared for Emma. And I was scared that if I told the truth about what he'd done to the dog, he would use it against me. I thought if the dog disappeared, James would have one less thing to be angry about. I thought it would help us both move on." "Did you consider that your daughter might be traumatized by losing her dog?" Williams asked, his tone not accusatory but genuinely curious. Sarah's face crumpled. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Of course I did. I thought about it every single day for the first year, but I was so focused on getting myself and Emma away from James, on establishing ourselves as stable, that I convinced myself it was the right decision. I told myself that the dog would find a good home, that he would be happy and safe. And clearly he was. He's working as a courthouse dog, helping people. That's a good life for him." "But your daughter hasn't been happy," Williams pointed out. "She's been silent for 6 weeks. She's been withdrawn and traumatized. Did you connect that silence to the loss of her dog?" "I didn't know," Sarah whispered. "I honestly didn't know she was that upset about Buddy. She cried when he first disappeared, but children. I thought children moved on. I thought she would adjust. I was dealing with my own trauma, my own fear. I failed her. I know that now." Williams made notes, his expression compassionate but professional. "Ms. Harrison, I need to ask you something very important. When you say you were scared of James, were you referring only to his potential for animal abuse, or were you concerned about his behavior toward you or your daughter?" Sarah hesitated. This was the moment where everything could change. This was the moment where she could finally tell the truth or continue protecting James's reputation. "He never hit me," she said carefully. "But he had become verbally abusive. He was drinking more. He was angry all the time. One time he threw a glass across the room during an argument. It missed me, but just barely. He said he was sorry immediately, claimed he wasn't aiming for me, but she trailed off. I was scared. I didn't feel safe in my own home. Back at the courthouse, detective met with judge to deliver her preliminary findings. The judge listened carefully as outlined what each parent had revealed. So we have a picture of a marriage that deteriorated, summarized. James was drinking, becoming emotionally volatile, and had a physical altercation with the dog. Sarah, whether justified or not, took the dog to protect it and removed the child from what she perceived as an increasingly unsafe environment. However, Sarah's method, lying about how she obtained the dog and surrendering it to a shelter, means she has not been truthful with the court about her actions. Judge nodded slowly. And the dog, is there definitive proof it's the same animal? We're waiting on veterinary records from the shelter. They're searching their files from 18 months ago. But based on the description, the timeline, and most importantly, the child's recognition and response, I would say it's highly probable that Duke is indeed Buddy. Judge stood and walked to her window again, looking out over the city. This case has now revealed deeper issues than either parent has been willing to acknowledge. Sarah information and made decisions unilaterally. James's behavior, whether he intended it or not, created a situation where his ex-partner felt compelled to protect both the child and the animal. And Emma lost her voice because she lost her security, her dog, and her faith that the adults in her life could be trusted to protect her. She turned back to, I want the veterinary records confirmed, and I want a psychological evaluation of both parents. This custody hearing is no longer about who gets Emma. It's about whether either parent is fit to have unsupervised custody of a traumatized child while they themselves are unresolved. Later that evening, sat with Emma, watching the child sleep. Emma had been given a mild sedative to help her rest after the emotional intensity of the day. Her grandmother stroked her hair gently, thinking about how 2 years of secrets and untruth had resulted in this child's silence. The next morning, as dawn broke over Nashville, the veterinary records came back from the shelter. The microchip matched. Duke was definitively Buddy. All the pieces had finally come together, and the real work of healing could begin, though no one yet understood how profound that healing would need to be. The courthouse had been cleared for a special session on the morning following the dramatic revelations. Judge had ordered that Emma be brought back, but this time not for legal proceedings. Instead, a court-appointed child psychologist, doctor, would conduct an informal evaluation with Emma in a comfortable, safe environment. The judge had specifically requested that Duke be present as well, understanding that the dog's presence seemed to be the key to unlocking Emma's emotional world. Doctor was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes, graying hair, and decades of experience working with traumatized children. She had set up her temporary office in one of the courthouse's side rooms, transforming it from its usual austere appearance into something more welcoming. There were soft cushions on the floor, soft lighting, and children's books scattered on a low shelf. A small table held juice boxes and animal crackers. In the corner, a large dog bed had been prepared for Duke. Sat with Emma, waiting outside the room. Emma was unusually calm this morning, as if the act of speaking yesterday had released some of the pressure that had been building inside her. She asked about Buddy repeatedly and kept assuring her that they would see the dog soon. When Officer Mitchell arrived with Duke, Emma's entire face lit up. She stood and rushed toward the dog, and Mitchell gently guided the animal toward the child. Emma threw her arms around Duke's neck, and for the first time in 2 years, tears flowed freely from her eyes. But these were not tears of sadness alone. They were tears of relief, recognition, and overwhelming emotion finally released. Buddy, she whispered over and over into the dog's fur. Buddy, Buddy, Buddy. His own eyes filled with tears as she watched her granddaughter reconnect with a piece of her lost world. Doctor observed from the doorway, making mental notes. She waited until Emma had been with the dog for several minutes before gently inviting them both into her temporary office. Was allowed to remain as well, positioned where she could observe but not interfere. Duke settled immediately onto his dog bed, and Emma sat beside him, her small hand stroking his back. The dog's presence seemed to have a profoundly calming effect on the child. "Hi, Emma," Doctor said softly, sitting on the floor to be at the child's eye level. "My name is Doctor. I'm so glad you could come see me today, and I see you have a friend with you." "Buddy," Emma said, her voice soft but no longer completely absent. "My buddy." "Tell me about Buddy," Doctor encouraged gently. "What do you remember about him?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hand continuing to stroke the dog's fur in a rhythmic, soothing pattern. Then, in a halting, fragmented way, words began to flow. "Buddy was my friend," she started. "He slept in my room, he was soft, he liked to play in the yard. Daddy played with Buddy, they were best friends." "That sounds nice," Doctor said, encouraging her to continue. "What else do you remember?" "Mommy and Daddy were loud," Emma said, her voice becoming smaller. "They yelled. Buddy didn't like it. He was scared. I was scared." "That must have been scary," Doctor acknowledged. "Tell me what happened." Emma paused, and Doctor could see her struggling to organize her thoughts, to translate her experiences into words her 3-year-old mind could articulate. Daddy was angry. He grabbed Buddy, not nice, he was rough." Emma's voice trembled. "I wanted to help Buddy, but I was scared." "You were scared," Doctor repeated, validating the emotion. "What happened next?" "Mommy took Buddy. She said we were going away. Daddy was yelling. Mommy had a bag. She took me and Buddy in the car. But then Mommy left Buddy at a place that smelled funny, and I cried so much. I wanted Buddy." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she spoke, but she continued, the floodgates having been opened. "Mommy said Buddy was going to be okay, but I didn't believe her. I knew Buddy was sad without me. I was sad without Buddy. Everything was different after that. We moved to Grandma's house. I didn't have my room anymore. I didn't have Daddy anymore. And I didn't have Buddy." Emma pressed her face against Duke's neck, sobbing silently. The dog, with the wisdom that animals sometimes possess, turned his head and licked the child's face gently, as if offering comfort. Doctor gave Emma several minutes to cry, allowing the emotional release to happen naturally. Had to cover her own mouth to suppress her sobs. She had watched her granddaughter suffer in silence for so long, and now, finally, the child was allowing herself to feel. After several minutes, Emma's crying subsided to quiet sniffles. Doctor handed her tissues and a juice box, giving her a moment to calm herself. "Emma, I want to tell you something very important," Doctor said gently. "What happened between your mommy and Daddy was not your fault. You didn't cause it. You couldn't have stopped it. Sometimes, grown-ups have problems they can't fix, and those problems hurt the people they love. But it's never the child's job to fix those problems. Do you understand?" Emma looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I couldn't help Daddy." "No, sweetheart," Doctor said with gentle firmness. "You couldn't help Daddy. You couldn't help Mommy. That was their job as grown-ups, to take care of you and to handle their own problems. You just needed to be a little girl and feel safe." "But I didn't feel safe," Emma whispered. "I know," Doctor acknowledged, "and I'm very sorry about that. But Emma, I want you to know that your grandma loves you very much. And your mommy and Daddy love you too, even though they made mistakes. And now, seeing Buddy again, that's helping you remember that good things can come back, that you're not alone." Emma looked at Duke, her hand resuming its gentle stroking of his fur. "Buddy came back," she said, wonder in her voice. "Buddy is here." "Yes," Doctor confirmed. "Buddy came back. And sometimes when we lose something we love, we can't get it back exactly the way it was. But sometimes we get something new that helps us heal. And sometimes we get second chances." Over the next hour, Doctor continued her conversation with Emma, allowing the child to share more memories, more fears, more of the emotional weight she had been carrying. With Duke present, Emma seemed able to access parts of herself that had been locked away. By the end of the session, a dramatic transformation was visible. Emma was still sad. The weight of what she had experienced hadn't magically disappeared, but she was no longer silent. She was no longer trapped in her own mind. She had found her voice again, and in finding it, she was beginning the process of healing. When the session concluded and held Emma in her arms, the child spoke clearly. "Grandma, Buddy helped me remember. Buddy helped me feel again." Held her granddaughter close, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby, Buddy's a very special dog, and you're a very special, very brave little girl." Later that afternoon, Doctor met with Judge in her chambers to deliver her initial psychological assessment. "Your Honor," Doctor began, "Emma's silence was not a sign of severe psychological damage, though she has certainly experienced trauma. Rather, her silence was a coping mechanism. She had experienced loss on multiple levels: loss of her father's presence, loss of her mother's stability, loss of her home, and most significantly, loss of her dog. She internalized all of this and couldn't process it verbally because she was too young to understand what was happening and too frightened to ask for help." "Is she going to be okay?" Judge asked. "With proper support, yes," Doctor said confidently. "But that support cannot come only from her parents. At least initially, she needs consistent, stable care, the kind her grandmother is providing. She needs therapy, and she needs to know that it's safe to feel things again, to express herself, to trust the adults around her." "And her parents?" the judge asked. "Both parents love Emma," Doctor said carefully. "But both parents have unresolved issues that have prevented them from being fully present for their daughter. James has an alcohol problem that escalates during stress. Sarah has anxiety and a tendency toward unilateral decision-making without consulting others. Both of these issues need to be addressed before either parent should have unsupervised custody of this child." Judge nodded, understanding now that the real work was just beginning. 3 days after Emma's breakthrough session with Doctor, both James and Sarah Harrison were required to return to the courthouse for what Judge called accountability hearings, separate sessions, designed not as legal proceedings in the traditional sense, but as structured conversations where both parents would be confronted with the impact of their actions on their daughter. James arrived first, his appearance reflecting the toll the past few days had taken on him. He had learned that Emma had spoken, had opened up to the psychologist, had called out his rough treatment of the dog. The information had devastated him. He sat in the judge's chambers, his attorney beside him, looking like a man who had finally begun to see himself clearly. "Mr. Harrison," Judge began, her tone not cruel but firm, "Doctor has provided me with her assessment of your daughter. Emma remembers you grabbing Buddy roughly. She remembers you being angry. She remembers being frightened. She remembers thinking it was her job to help everyone, and her failure to do so contributed to the loss of her dog and her family structure. How do you respond to this?" James's jaw clenched. He had been avoiding the full weight of his actions, rationalizing them as just bad moments during a difficult time. But hearing them reflected back to him through his daughter's memories was devastating. I didn't realize she remembered that," he said quietly. "I was so angry that night. I had been drinking and I wasn't thinking clearly. I never wanted to hurt Buddy. I loved that dog." "But you did hurt him," Judge said, not unkindly but with absolute clarity. "You treated him roughly in a moment of rage, and your daughter witnessed that. She became afraid of you. She became afraid of her environment. And when her mother took the dog away, Emma connected that to your behavior. In her child's mind, Mommy had to save Buddy from Daddy." James put his head in his hands. "I didn't know she felt that way." "Of course you didn't," Judge said, "because you were too focused on your own pain, your own anger, your own sense of betrayal to pay attention to what your daughter was experiencing. Now, I'm going to ask you some difficult questions, and I want honest answers. How much do you typically drink?" James looked up, clearly unprepared for the directness of the question. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something, but James held up his hand. "I want to answer honestly," he said. He took a deep breath. "Since the divorce, probably more than I should. When I'm stressed, when I'm angry, I drink. I've been drinking more in the past 2 years than I did in the 5 years before that." "Are you an alcoholic?" Judge asked. I don't know," James said, and there was genuine uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe. I've never been diagnosed. I just know that when things get hard, I reach for alcohol. It helps me not feel things." "It helps you not feel things until it doesn't," Judge said bluntly. "And then what happens? You become angry. You become volatile. You do things like grab a dog roughly or yell at your ex-partner or frighten your daughter. Do you understand the cycle you're in?" James nodded slowly, the realization seeming to settle over him like a heavy weight. "Yes, I think I do." "Good," Judge said. "Because before I make any custody decisions, you're going to get treatment. You're going to see a therapist who specializes in substance abuse. You're going to go to AA meetings. And you're going to do the hard work of understanding why you use alcohol to cope and what your daughter needs from you instead." 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a similar chair in the judge's chambers, but her demeanor was markedly different. She was composed on the surface, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her purse. "Ms. Harrison," Judge began, "I've reviewed the information from the investigation into your actions regarding the dog. You made a decision unilaterally to remove the animal from the home and surrender it to a shelter under false pretenses. You did not consult with Mr. Harrison. You did not attempt legal remedies. You simply took matters into your own hands. Why?" "Because I was scared," Sarah said immediately. "I was frightened for the dog's safety and for Emma's safety. I thought James was becoming dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Judge pressed. "Did he ever physically attack you?" "No," Sarah admitted. "But he threw a glass during an argument. He grabbed things roughly. His temper was escalating." "So you decided to protect your daughter and the dog by taking them away from the home," Judge said. "But you didn't establish a safe living situation for them. You didn't file for an emergency protective order. You didn't seek legal custody. Instead, you moved in with your mother and secretly surrendered the family dog to a shelter. In doing so, you created a situation where your daughter lost her father, her home, and her beloved pet all at the same time." Sarah's face crumpled. I know that now. I've been thinking about nothing else." "Tell me about your mental health history," Judge said, changing the subject slightly. "Doctor noted in her interviews with you that you have significant anxiety. Is that diagnosed?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I've been on medication for anxiety since I was 25. Sometimes the medication works well, sometimes less so, depending on my stress level." "And during your marriage to James, how was your anxiety?" Judge asked. "It got worse," Sarah admitted. "Especially in the last year before the separation. I was constantly worried. I couldn't sleep well. I was having panic attacks. I was convinced that James was going to leave me, that I would lose Emma, that everything would fall apart." "And did everything fall apart?" Judge asked. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I made it fall apart. I was so convinced that bad things were going to happen that I made them happen. I took the dog. I drove James and Emma further apart. I created the very disaster I was afraid of." "Why?" Judge asked. Sarah looked up, tears in her eyes. "Because when you're convinced disaster is coming, it's better to control it than to wait for it to surprise you. If I took Buddy away, at least I was making a choice. If I left James first, at least I wasn't being abandoned. I was so trapped in my own anxiety that I couldn't see what I was doing to Emma." Judge leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Harrison, your anxiety disorder is real, and it deserves treatment. But it doesn't excuse the decisions you made. Your daughter spent 6 weeks without speaking because you made choices based on fear rather than thinking clearly about what Emma needed. Now, you're also going to receive treatment. You're going to continue with a therapist, potentially a new one if your current therapist isn't equipped to handle what you've done. And you're going to work with that therapist on recognizing how your anxiety affects your parenting decisions. I understand, Sarah said, nodding. Later in her chambers, Judge reviewed both interviews with court staff. A picture of two flawed people, neither evil, neither entirely villainous, emerged. James had a substance abuse problem that had escalated during marital stress. Sarah had an anxiety disorder that had manifested in hypervigilance and unilateral decision-making. Both had hurt their daughter, not through malice, but through their own unresolved issues. The judge called in Doctor for a final consultation. Doctor, in your professional opinion, are these people capable of change? Judge asked. Yes, Doctor said firmly. Both of them. James is beginning to recognize his substance abuse problem. Sarah is beginning to understand how her anxiety has driven her choices. They're both capable of genuine change, but only if they're committed to it and receive proper support. What about Emma? The judge asked. Is she safe with either parent unsupervised? No, Doctor said. Not yet. Emma needs stability and consistency. She needs to know that the adults in her life can manage their own emotions and make decisions in her best interest, not their own interest. She's safe. With supervised visitation from either parent, she can begin to rebuild relationships. But unsupervised custody with either parent, given their current states, would be harmful to Emma's continued healing. Judge nodded, having reached the same conclusion. So we proceed with temporary guardianship to supervised visitation and mandatory treatment for both parents. That would be my recommendation, Doctor agreed. That evening, Emma sat watching her grandmother prepare dinner. The child was talking almost constantly now, asking questions, telling stories, processing her experiences out loud. It was exhausting and wonderful at the same time. Grandma, Emma asked, why did Mommy and Daddy stop loving each other? Set down her knife and pulled Emma into her lap. Oh, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't solve together. It's not anybody's fault. It's just sad. Is it my fault? Emma asked, the eternal question of children in divorce situations. No, baby, said firmly. It's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. And your mommy and daddy both still love you so very much. Even though Daddy was mean to Buddy, Emma asked. Even though Daddy made a mistake with Buddy, corrected gently. People make mistakes. That's what makes us human. What matters is that we learn from those mistakes and try to do better. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer for now, but knew the questions would continue, and she would be there to answer them, to help her granddaughter process the complex emotions of a shattered family. The courthouse was packed on the morning Judge issued her final ruling in the Harrison custody case. The journalists who had been following the story sat poised with their notepads. Sat with Emma in the back row, the child dressed in a pretty yellow dress. James and Sarah sat on opposite sides of the courtroom with their respective attorneys. Officer Mitchell stood with Duke, the dog's presence now integral to the proceedings rather than ancillary. Even Doctor was present, having been requested by the judge to observe the ruling. Judge entered with her characteristic authority, and the room fell silent. She took her seat at the bench and looked out over the assembled crowd before beginning to speak. This case came before me as a custody dispute, she began. Two parents fighting over a child, each claiming to be in the child's best interest. However, through the investigation and interviews conducted, it became clear that this case was never truly about custody. It was about two adults whose unresolved personal issues created an environment in which their daughter was unable to find her voice, unable to feel safe, unable to be a child. She paused, letting her words settle. I have reviewed Doctor's comprehensive psychological evaluation. I have conducted individual interviews with both parents. I have observed their reactions to the truth about what they have done, and I have reached some conclusions that may surprise those accustomed to traditional custody rulings. James leaned forward slightly, anxiety clear on his face. First, Judge continued, I'm not awarding full custody to either parent at this time. Temporary guardianship of Emma Harrison will remain with her grandmother, Harrison, who has demonstrated consistent, stable care and unwavering commitment to the child's. This is not punishment for either parent. This is recognition that Emma needs stability and security as she heals. Sarah closed her eyes, tears beginning to form. However, the judge continued, this is not a permanent arrangement. I am instead implementing what I will call a conditional co-parenting plan. Both James and Sarah will have supervised visitation with Emma, increasing in frequency and duration as they demonstrate progress in their individual therapeutic work. Both parents will participate in intensive family therapy with a court-approved therapist. Both parents will also engage in individual therapy addressing their specific issues. Judge looked directly at James. Mr. Harrison, you will attend AA meetings twice weekly. You will obtain a substance abuse evaluation and follow all recommendations. You will remain abstinent from alcohol for a minimum of 1 year. During this period, all visits with your daughter will be supervised. After 1 year of demonstrated sobriety and successful therapy, we will revisit the visitation arrangement. She then looked at Sarah. Ms. Harrison, you will continue psychiatric treatment for your anxiety disorder, potentially adjusting your medication in consultation with your psychiatrist. You will see a therapist trained in anxiety disorders and family dynamics. You will learn to recognize how your anxiety manifests in your parenting decisions. Like your ex-partner, your visitations will be supervised initially, increasing as you demonstrate progress in recognizing and managing your anxiety in healthier ways. Squeezed Emma's hand gently. The child was too young to fully understand the legal language, but she seemed to sense that something important was happening. Now, Judge said, a note of innovation entering her voice, I want to address something unusual. The catalyst for this entire case was Emma's recognition of a dog she had lost. That dog is now thriving as a courthouse support animal. I believe that this particular dog holds significance for this family's healing journey. She turned to Officer Mitchell. Officer, I understand you have some flexibility in your scheduling with Duke. Mitchell nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Duke works primarily on Mondays and Wednesdays, but I can arrange other times as needed for special circumstances. Good, Judge said. I am ordering that, as part of the supervised visitation process, both parents will participate in what I will call therapeutic dog visits. Once weekly, each parent will visit with their daughter in the presence of both and Duke. The dog serves as an emotional anchor and a reminder of connection. Additionally, I suggest that the family consider adopting a dog of their own once James has achieved 6 months of sobriety, and Sarah has demonstrated consistent progress in managing her anxiety. She paused, letting this unusual recommendation sink in. A dog is a responsibility, the judge continued. A dog requires care, consistency, and putting another being's needs before your own. I believe that caring for an animal as a family unit could be part of your healing process. However, this is a suggestion, not an order. The family may choose to pursue this or not. The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath at this unconventional ruling. It was neither harsh punishment nor enabling permissiveness. It was creative problem-solving focused entirely on healing rather than on traditional notions of justice. Judge continued with the procedural details. Family therapy sessions will occur weekly. Individual therapy will occur as recommended by each therapist. Progress reports will be submitted to the court monthly. In 6 months, we will reconvene to assess progress. At that time, we will determine whether the visitation arrangement needs adjustment. She looked at James and Sarah directly. I want to be very clear about something. This ruling assumes that both of you are genuinely committed to change. If I see evidence that either of you is going through the motions without genuine commitment to your own healing, this court will revisit the arrangement. Emma's is not negotiable. Your rights are conditional on your demonstrated commitment to being healthier versions of yourselves. Then, addressing the room more broadly, I also want to commend the role that this dog has played in this case. Officer Mitchell, please relay to the police department that Duke's presence here has been transformative, and I want to commend Harrison for her unwavering love and protection of her granddaughter. Finally, I want to commend Emma Harrison for her bravery in speaking 2 words that changed everything. The judge's gaze softened as she looked at the little girl. Emma, you are very brave. You helped all of us understand that sometimes honesty is more important than silence. I'm proud of you. Emma looked up at her grandmother, not fully understanding, but sensing the importance of the moment. This hearing is adjourned, Judge said, banging her gavel once. I will see all parties in 6 months. After the hearing concluded, there was an unusual scene in the courthouse hallway. Stood with Emma while Officer Mitchell brought Duke over. James and Sarah, despite being on opposite sides of a bitter dispute, both approached carefully. Your Honor suggested we might want to, spend time with Emma and Duke together, James said too, his voice uncertain. During supervised visits. We could start with one next week, said carefully, if everyone agrees. Sarah nodded, I'd like that. Emma tugged on sleeve and pointed at Duke. Buddy come to visit Emma. Officer Mitchell smiled. Well, it's going to be a little different. Each of you will have your own time with Emma and Duke, but Duke will be here to help you remember that even when things are broken, they can sometimes be fixed. As led Emma away, the child chattered about seeing Buddy again. Behind them, James and Sarah stood awkwardly in the courthouse hallway, both of them carrying the weight of their failures, but also, perhaps for the first time, genuine hope that change was possible. Later that evening, sat with Emma, reading her a bedtime story. The child was more relaxed than she had been in months, her small body curled against her grandmother's side. Grandma, Emma asked as closed the book, will Daddy and Mommy get better? Took a deep breath. I think they're going to try very hard to get better, and that's all anyone can do, try their very best. And will Buddy come see us? Emma asked. Yes, sweetheart, Buddy will come see you, and maybe someday we'll have our own dog too. Emma smiled, and felt the weight of 2 years of trauma begin to lift, not disappeared, but transformed into something that could be worked with, healed, grown from. In his apartment that night, James attended an AA meeting for the first time. In her office, Sarah called her psychiatrist to request an appointment for medication adjustment. And in the courthouse, Judge reviewed her notes on the case, confident that she had found a path that honored both justice and compassion, both accountability and hope. The Nashville courtroom looked different on this August morning 6 months later. The same judge sat at the bench, but the atmosphere had shifted from adversarial to collaborative. Sat with Emma, who was now 4 years old and chatting animatedly about the puppy she had just adopted. James sat with his attorney, but gone was the defensive posture from before. Instead, he looked healthier, clearer, with a calmness that came from genuine sobriety. Sarah sat nearby, her anxiety still present but managed, her movements more confident, her eyes clearer. Judge entered and took her seat. She looked at the assembled group with something approaching fondness. Welcome back, she began. I've reviewed all the progress reports from the past 6 months. This is quite remarkable. Mr. Harrison, let's start with you. Your AA sponsor has provided monthly reports indicating perfect attendance at meetings. Your substance abuse counselor reports significant progress in understanding your triggers and developing healthy coping mechanisms. Most importantly, your daughter has reported to doctor that you are present, engaged, and emotionally available during your visits. How do you feel you've progressed? James stood and his voice was steady and humble. Your Honor, 6 months ago I didn't believe I could change. I didn't think I had a problem, but sitting in those AA meetings and hearing my own story and other people's experiences, it changed everything. I've learned that I wasn't angry at Sarah or anyone else. I was angry at myself, and I was using alcohol to run away from that anger instead of facing it. I'm not perfect. Some days are harder than others. but I haven't had a drink in 6 months, and I don't plan to have another one. Not because I have to, but because I want to be the father Emma deserves." Judge nodded approvingly. She then turned to Sarah. "Ms. Harrison, your therapist reports that you've made significant strides in recognizing how your anxiety manifests in your parenting. Your psychiatrist has adjusted your medication with positive results. Most significantly, you and Mr. Harrison have begun co-parenting conversations without conflict. Can you speak to this progress?" Sarah stood, her voice slightly tremulous but genuine. "Your Honor, I spent so much of my life trying to control everything because I was afraid of loss. But in trying to control everything, I actually created the losses I feared most. I lost my husband. I lost my daughter's voice. I lost my peace of mind. Over the past 6 months, I've learned to sit with anxiety without acting on it. I've learned to talk to James about decisions concerning Emma instead of making them unilaterally. And I've learned to trust that even when I can't control outcomes, I can still be a good mother. It's been the hardest 6 months of my life, but also the most healing." Judge smiled slightly. "I'm impressed by both of your commitments to change. Now, Ms. Harrison, I understand you and Mr. Harrison have a joint proposal regarding Emma's living arrangements." Squeezed Emma's hand gently as stood. "Yes, Your Honor. James has been in his apartment for 6 months and it's stable. Sarah has been in a comfortable home with room for Emma. They've both completed their therapy requirements. We've been discussing what's best for Emma, and we've decided to transition to a shared custody arrangement. Emma would spend Monday through Thursday with her mother, Thursday through Sunday with her father, with remaining involved and available as needed. We believe Emma would benefit from having both parents present in her daily life." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. This was an extraordinary proposal. 2 parents who had been locked in bitter custody battle now proposing a shared arrangement that prioritized the child's access to both of them. "And Emma, what do you think about this?" Judge asked gently, looking at the 4-year-old. Emma stood on her grandmother's lap, not fully understanding the legal implications but understanding the practical outcome. "I get to see Daddy and Mommy?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," James said, his voice catching with emotion. "You get to see Mommy and Daddy." "And Buddy?" Emma asked. "Buddy will always be your special friend," Officer Mitchell interjected from where he stood with Duke. "And I'll bring him to visit whenever you want." "And Luna?" Emma asked, referring to her new puppy. "Luna goes wherever you go," said smiling. Judge looked at the family before her, not perfect, not without scars, but genuinely committed to healing and growth. "I'm going to approve this arrangement," she said. "With one condition: monthly family therapy sessions will continue for the next 6 months to ensure the transition is smooth. After 6 months, we'll evaluate whether to continue or discontinue. Additionally, I want to recognize something remarkable about this case." She paused, addressing the courtroom. 2 years ago, a little girl lost her voice because the adults in her life were in conflict. 6 months ago, that little girl spoke 2 words, "That's Buddy," that changed everything. Those 2 words prompted an investigation that revealed uncomfortable truths about both parents. Both parents were forced to confront their own issues and take responsibility for their actions. And both parents chose to do the hard work of change. Judge looked directly at Emma. "Emma, you taught all of us something very important. You taught us that sometimes when we're honest about what we see and what we feel, it gives other people permission to be honest too. You taught us that healing is possible, even when things seem broken. And you taught us that love is stronger than conflict." The judge then addressed James and Sarah. "You have both demonstrated remarkable courage in this process. You've shown that it's possible to separate as partners while still remaining co-parents. You've shown that individual growth and family healing can happen simultaneously. You've shown that accountability and compassion can coexist. I'm proud of both of you." Over the next hour, the formal custody arrangements were finalized. Emma would indeed split her time between both parents, with remaining as a stabilizing presence. The monthly therapy sessions were scheduled, and most importantly, the adversarial nature of the case was transformed into a collaborative approach to parenting. After the hearing concluded, something extraordinary happened in the hallway. James and Sarah stood together, speaking quietly but genuinely. They weren't friends, and they likely never would be romantically connected again, but they had become something perhaps more important: true co-parents united in their commitment to their daughters. "I'm really proud of you," Sarah said to James. "I know how hard this has been." "I'm proud of you too," James replied. "I'm sorry for everything I put you and Emma through." "I'm sorry too," Sarah said, "for how I handled things, for keeping Buddy from you, for not trusting you with the truth." Stood with Emma and Officer Mitchell, watching the interaction. "Will Mommy and Daddy get back together?" Emma asked hopefully. "No, sweetheart," said gently, "but they're going to be better friends, and that's good for you. That's better for everyone." Officer Mitchell smiled. "Sometimes families look different than we think they should, but if there's love and commitment, they can be just as strong." That evening at James's apartment, something remarkable occurred. James, Sarah, and Emma sat together around a dinner table, not perfectly comfortable but genuinely trying. Emma's new puppy, Luna, a golden retriever, played with toys in the corner. Emma chattered about her day, about school, about the things she wanted to do. Later, when Emma was put to bed, she asked to sleep with Luna curled up beside her. As tucked her in, Emma whispered, "Grandma, Buddy helped me get my words back, and Luna helps me be happy again. Do dogs fix broken families?" Smiled, tears in her eyes. "Not exactly, sweetheart, but sometimes a dog helps us remember what's important. Sometimes a dog helps us see that broken things can be healed if we're willing to try." His apartment that night, James sat at his desk and wrote in the journal his therapist had recommended. He wrote about his journey, about the 6 months of sobriety, about attending his 170th AA meeting, about learning to be a present father. At the end, he wrote, "I lost my daughter's voice for 6 weeks because I couldn't control my own. Emma taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is admit we're broken and ask for help to heal. Today, I heard my daughter laugh. I heard her plan her future, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was going to be okay." In her home, Sarah sat with her therapist via video call for her final regular session before transitioning to monthly check-ins. "I spent so much time trying to protect everyone from danger," Sarah reflected. "But the biggest danger was my own unmanaged fear." Emma needed her mother to be calm and present, not hypervigilant and reactive. "I'm learning that protection sometimes means stepping back and trusting others." And in the courthouse, Judge filed away the Harrison case, making a note to include it in her annual report on innovative family law approaches. She had pioneered something new with this case, not traditional custody battles, but transformation-focused justice. As she filed away the paperwork, she smiled, knowing that Emma's 2 words, "That's Buddy," had done more to heal a family than any traditional legal ruling could have done. In Officer Mitchell's patrol car, Duke rode peacefully, his work as a courthouse support animal continuing. But now he carried with him the knowledge that he had been more than just a comfort animal. He had been a bridge, a messenger, a symbol of reconnection. And every time he visited with Emma, he carried with him the reminder that sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, from a dog's faithful presence, from a child's honest words, and from a family's willingness to change.